Okay, well, you must be thoroughly sick of me by now, but I've been asked to do some kind of summing up at the end, and really what I want to present is the same framework I try to get EMBAs interested in, management folk interested in, to give them a bag capable of containing all the concepts and frameworks that they're exposed to. So I'm looking for a big picture. I'm remember the protagonist in the film Jaws. At one stage, he sees the big shark for the first time, and he stumbles back and says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." And I think we are going to need a bigger boat because we don't have one big enough to handle the challenges we face. So here we go. I've got a bit of systems lingo here. It's a grand systems narrative. This is not a theory or hypothesis. It is a story. Stories are how we make sense of the world, and so I have no problems with raising narrative to the same level as paradigms and so on. And inductive agent-based, based on what people actually do, model in narrative mode, also known as story, to embrace and contain deductive axiom-based models in engineering mode. Okay, my view of reality is that it is all relative, Moritz Escher's picture. Everything makes sense from some perspective. The implication being that there is no view from nowhere. There's no detached God's eye view of reality, certainly none that we can aspire to. I'm going to be looking at only one of these levels, but systems thinking is basically a three-level perspective. It's the focal organization, which is level 0. The components come from underneath, and its context, which is above. And if you like, you can also put it into time with continuities from the past and contingencies from the future, all coming together in the present. It is dynamic. The level we're focusing on this afternoon is the focal organization, long, slow processes of growth on the front, rapid processes of destruction on the back loop. At the top, big, slow, contextual industry structure, government regulation, competitive dynamics, and below it, the fast component change that comes up underneath it, technologies, products, lives of people, frankly, as well. Movements, not just structures. This is something from Ralph Stacey's work, if you're familiar with it. It's a 2x2 matrix. Basically, it says here the agreement on problems, high and low, and here the certainty on their solutions. So it's essentially ends and means, high and low. So you've got a high agreement on a problem and a high agreement on a solution. It's a simple situation that you can just plan and control. Very simple, directive approach. Here we have low agreement on problems, but high agreement on solution. This could be socially complicated. Over here, low agreement on technical solution. This is technically complicated. As opposed to the zone of complexity where we have low agreement on the problem and low agreement on the solution. Over here is chaos. Basically two approaches. This is the engineering technical field, political engineering, social engineering, if you will, and technical engineering. And this is what I call the ecological adaptive zone. And the fight in management academia, particularly, not academia, theory and practice, particularly in the US, is they want to apply the engineering technical model to everything. They don't recognize complexity, and they don't recognize the role that an ecological adaptive approach can play. Okay, 3 takeaways from this afternoon. 1, nature as a model of change resilience and renewal. Secondly, a symbol of perpetual change, the Möbius strip, and a quote: "Nothing lasts unless it is incessantly renewed." Nothing lasts unless it is incessantly renewed. The quote is actually from Charles de Gaulle, describing the French army in 1942, but I think it has broader application. So, 3 takeaways. The ecological perspective basically says enterprises conceived in passion, born in communities of trust, grow through the application of reason, and mature in power where they get stuck, leading to crisis, destruction, but with the possibility of renewal. So passion, trust, reason, power, crisis, destruction, renewal, these are biblical themes. So if I sound like a preacher, I apologize. Okay, I ask my students, and I don't want to insult your intelligence, I ask them how long is the coastline of Britain? And I give them a clue. John O'Groats to Land's End, I'm sorry, I have the metric version in here, is 1,000 kilometers. And I want to know how long it is round the coastline. And to make it easy, multiple choice, rounded to the nearest 100 kilometers. Is it 7,500, 18,300, 63,700, 132,100? None of the above. Please indulge me. Have a quick discussion around the table whilst I play some inspirational music. How long is the coastline of Britain?
All of the above.
We can skip the music.
Can we skip the music? Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
Potentially infinite.
Okay, potentially. Well, which is the choice?
All of
All of the above. Yeah, you're terrific. Okay, I'm sorry. I did this in Austria, and I got the same from a huge 600-person group, and most of them came up with that. I knew it would insult your intelligence. I'm sorry. Okay, scale matters, purpose matters. That's it. Your purpose determines your scale. Your scale determines your purpose, as we will see. Right, so Portuguese-Spanish border, I'm sure you've seen this. It's out of Mandelbrot, fractal nature, fractal geometry of nature. Portuguese say that their border with Spain, this is pre-Google, 1214. Spanish say no, 987. Already you get a hint on all this stuff that the organization using the smaller yardstick discovers more. And I think this is much more than a geographical oddity. I think it is the essence of innovation, because where I've seen really great innovations, it's where people are shrinking, getting into the weeds, where that fine-grained view allows you to see opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise see when you are abstracting. And as we're going to see, abstraction is the major process whereby organizations get to manage large scale and at the same time start to lose their resilience. It's not only process scale in space, it's scale in time. Nice cloud over nice mountain. I'm a change agent. I just split it into 2. What will happen after I've divided the cloud? What do you think? What will happen? Any thoughts? Yeah. Michael.
The Egyptians will come thundering through the cloud and close over the drought.
So what will come thundering through?
The Egyptians.
The Egyptians. Yes. Yeah. Not yes. Okay. No. Well, and it will close. So you're saying it's reform. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. You just lose the Egyptians, but it's not a structure like a chair or a table. It is the visible manifestation of a largely invisible process. This particular cloud is formed by warm, wet air coming in from the sea, hitting the mountain, going up, loses its moisture, becomes visible, carries on cold, dry air. So if you want to change this structure, you have to change the dynamics that produce it. And this is what I keep on getting on to managers. I say, you keep on talking about changing organizational structure, but you have no idea of the processes that produce it, and you can change that structure, but if the processes remain intact, it will snap back to its old form. Another example, I give them in change, 1984, Cape Cod, Chatham Bars, a wonderful hotel. Anyone been to Chatham Bars Inn? prodigiously expensive, so you need someone else paying. But it's gorgeous. I mean, it's got comfy cushions and a wonderful buffet, and the muslin curtains blow in the wind. I can't recommend it more highly. But what we're interested in is, of course, the bars, which are not the places to drink, but the beaches. So it's 1984. Go forward 5 years. 1989. Has Chatham Bars changed? Well, if you go to the inn, it's wonderful with the wonderful buffet and the comfy cushions and the blowing muslin curtains through the French doors. But of course, the beaches have changed significantly. They've moved. They are a lot more like clouds than structures. And if I had built a house in 1984 right there, it would now look something like this, because I built a structure on top of a process, or rather a slow-changing process over a fast-moving process. And this, as I say, to every organization is just like this beach house in 1984. It's built on processes which they don't even understand, that can undermine it, disrupt it in the current management jargon very easily. And we go forward another 5 years, 1994, Chatham Bars, the beaches have moved again. And if you're a fisherman going to sea, you might notice it, but if you're a holiday maker, it seems the same. And of course the inn is still there, and it's gorgeous with the comfy buffet and the blowing cushions and so on. Okay. We used to go when we were young to, the kids were young, to Hilton Head Island, and I was riding down the lovely sandy beach, and I came across this one, a kid's sandcastle, going to disappear with the first tide, a driftwood hut built by some teenagers, first winter storm will take that, and these huge multi-million-dollar executive homes. Well, we know the bugs will get them in 50 years, and a hurricane can take it at any time. So depending on your scale, these are all temporary sandcastles. So whether you see something as temporary or permanent is a question of scale, space and time again. And so it's both and, not either or. Stability and change coexist. Scale matters in space and time. Stability through change, and change through stability. This mutual entanglement of what we call stability and change. Okay, back to my favorite example, the forest. And we're going to be looking at forest succession. Where do forests come from? Well, you know, the narrative of idealized forest succession says they start in the open patch where there's equal access to sun and rain. Everything grows like crazy. Very little competition. Wonderful. Development left to right in conventional mode. But as they start to bump into each other and resources become scarce, you need to become more efficient. And you get more efficient by getting bigger. So increased competition breaks out, increased efficiency is required, which means you've got to get bigger. And so the weeds are succeeded by shrubs because they put down their roots, they get to the water first, they put up their branches, they get to the sun first. And so we go through classic softwood trees, hardwood trees, which are the most efficient processes of resources. They are the tall hierarchies in the forest world. But what you get, of course, is a decrease in variety compared with the open patch. And with that becomes reduced resilience, because you no longer have the variety to handle change. And this used to be thought, when we were back in the equilibrium world, the climax forest was stable, they thought. But it's not, and it raises the whole question of how these ecosystems renew themselves. And so we're going to, just before we go to the forest, I have to persuade my skeptical managers that this has anything to do with business. And I say, well, look at Walmart store sizes. This is the average size of Walmart stores since 1968. Started off in the backwoods of Arkansas. Sam Walton perfected a way to make money from very small variety stores. 16,000 square foot the first one, the others were 12,000. You can see that this is in about the 14,000 square foot range. And then over time, they've grown up to the large Walmart we know and love. And here are the store sizes. Peaked at 162,000 feet and about square feet in 2010, 10 times bigger than 50 years earlier. So Walmart went from being weeds through shrubs to trees. And when Sam Walton in 1962 started Walmart with this small-scale store, when he looked at the rural areas of Arkansas, he saw opportunities everywhere. You could put these small stores anywhere. Whereas Sears Roebuck, the dominant retailer at the time, they could not make money unless they had a minimum size of 100,000 square feet. And when they looked at Arkansas, it was a desert. No opportunity. Smaller scale, many more opportunities. And this, in the current management jargon, is what I would call disruptive innovation. Walmart came up underneath Sears and has just about finished eating them. There was no defense. Absolutely, Sears has no defense against Walmart whatsoever. Walmart itself is being disrupted by online purchasing, so that's another challenge. But and you can see Walmart is trying to defend itself. This is a different perspective on their ecology. It looks at the different stores. So these are the original discount stores, average size 106,000 square feet, being replaced by the supercenters. These are really the sequoias of the Walmart business, huge hierarchies. But there's a little green tinge coming in here, and I call these Walmart's weeds. Back in about early 2000s, Walmart decided that they needed a smaller format store to put into neighborhoods that could not sustain a big one. Now, these weren't very profitable, because these are hugely profitable. But Walmart wanted to suck the oxygen out of the water at that level, so they were not disrupted by the dollar stores in the same way that Walmart itself had disrupted Sears. So they wanted to sort of create a low resource area by putting in these small stores, some 40,000, some 15,000, and this was a strategy they started to try in 2014. The Wall Street Journal, they're embracing small stores. Latest update on it, it hasn't worked, particularly with the very small stores, the express stores. They're closing all 102 of them. And it's fascinating that the logistics guy says, our distribution system cannot get down that small anymore. And that was where they started the business, in the 12,000 square foot stores. So you've seen this loss of capacity to handle fine grain anymore. Inevitably makes them vulnerable. Okay, so back to our forest. Just the dimensions. These are from Holling, and Pillay, I gave her a preview of the presentation. This is capital stored, little, much, and this is connectedness of the system, weakly connected, strongly connected, and I'll explain in more detail. Let's start arbitrarily, bottom left. There's some weeds. It's actually elk grass growing there, and there's obviously been a fire of some kind. Into this patch, which has got a local seed bank, but also there are migrants coming in, birds coming in. One of the lessons from this, if you want to find opportunities, you have to move. Can't defend a territory. So the birds come in, importing all kinds of exotic plants, that wouldn't normally get there. And then over a long period of time, the forest starts to grow up. And we go through the weeds, the shrubs, the bigger shrubs, softwood trees. In this case, the climax species is a softwood tree called lodgepole pine. And here is the lodgepole pine, beautiful stand of trees, mature trees. And when the US Park Service got responsibility for the parks in 1880, the first thing they said, our duty is to keep the parks green and beautiful. We are going to suppress fire. So they started to put out the fires. And I'm sure if they'd been on a bonus scheme initially, it would look like a genius strategy, because the forest grew bigger and greener. But there was a problem. The lodgepole pine is a self-pruner. After about 40 years, mountain pine beetle eat it out, and you end up with standing firewood. And the result is, when lightning strikes, after suppression of fire for so long, you end up with fires that you can't put out, like they had in 1988, when 4 times as much wood burned as it had in the previous century. But you see, lodgepole pine needs to burn, not everywhere all the time, but somewhere, sometime, it must burn to recycle the tall hierarchy that hog the resources and create the nutrients in a form that the young can use, which leads us to the new open patch. And here it comes again. An endless cycle, long, slow processes of growth on the front, rapid processes of destruction on the back. And this is Buzz Holling's basic cycle. The R and K symbols come out of the logistics equation. R is the growth rate, K is the carrying capacity of the environment, and then his omega and alpha processes on the back. And this is the underlying inspiration for all this stuff. Long, slow processes of growth on the front, and then rapid processes of destruction on the back. And around we go. And I'm going to argue that this same dynamic is operating at many different scales, fractal scales, right throughout our social, political, and technical fields. This is from his book, Panarchy, which basically, here's the three-pane window again, focal organization, big, slow processes constrain it, small, fast processes can disrupt it. And of course, you can get to the third dimension, which is resilience. And so resilience is essentially high when you're in the open patch, and there's many different ways for resources to flow through the system. That is a weakly connected system. And resilience is lowest when you're on the right-hand side in a tightly connected system, because there the flow of resources has to go through the hierarchy. The trees, big trees, hog it all. Okay, so there we go, our Mobius strip. Essentially, this is an Eastern view of change. Two processes, one creative, the other destructive, each contains within it the seeds of the other, because everything that grows must die, but in dying it releases the nutrients for the next generation. And around we go. Traditional Western view of change, of course, is things go up and don't come down. Typical male delusion. Okay. Smokey is an anomalous figure here because he's got systems. Only you can put out forest fires. We don't actually need to ban Smokey. We need to introduce him to his long-lost twin sister, whose name is Flammy. And Flammy is a leader, a catalyst for change, probing, testing. Are you growing or are you dead wood? Can we redeploy our resources? Smokey, of course, we know and love, he's a manager. Continuity, policy, enforced discipline. Does it fit our procedures? Do you have the authority? Where is the budget? And it's both and, not either or. Bitterroot Farm, Montana, August 6, 2000. It's so hot, the elk are standing in the water. 1 year later, magical transformation. Running water, everything bursting with new growth, and the cycle for renewal is going again. Both and, not either or. So the key features of the eco-cycle, which was an academic colleague of mine named it, Holling's adaptive cycle applies to natural systems. The eco-cycle applies to human systems. Movements, not structures. Why do things stay the same? Stability is the conundrum in human systems. Change takes place on the edges, not in the core. So change comes from the desert, from the wilderness. Nothing fails like success because it confirms you in what you're doing, and creation requires destruction. They did not teach me that in business school. Okay, so we've only got to forests and we need to get to human systems, so here we go. Long, slow processes of growth on the front, rapid processes of destruction on the back, and of course, people aren't like trees, and we can think and talk and move and so on, so you need something that addresses cognition. And for me, this is the most exciting time when you take two frameworks and rub them together. You do a mashup of two frameworks, and out of it, and you've got to do a lot of mashing, but out of it, sometimes you suddenly say, bingo, there it is. And my bingo said, well, you've got to divide it into three areas, and let's call them passion, reason, and power. And this is all about innovators. In the middle, it's all about managers and leaders, and this is administrators on the side. And on the left here, we're free to act, don't know what to do. Classical entrepreneurial dilemma. You can do anything, but what do you do? I have not a clue. In the middle is what they teach in the business schools. Free to act, to know what to do. The rational man, being able to man, I'm afraid, unfortunately. And on the right here, the constrained actor, know what to do, not free to act. We know what we've got to do, but boy, we just can't get anything done because we're stuck, as we will see, in what I regard as a power trap, competency trap. Okay. On the left is all about the logics of identity, existential. Who are we? Why do we matter? What's our mission? On the right, it's all instrumental. What do I want and how do I get it? And they've got this tension between the we and the I, the collective and the individual running at the same time. And I'm galloping along here. Please, you'll have trouble stopping me, but you can always try. Okay, so where does everything begin? Community of practice. I showed this graph in a larger form last night. This is a Silicon Valley cluster of inventors. Entrepreneurship, process of improvisation, bricolage. Make a little, sell a little, make a little more. Oh boy, let's try something else. And they do a pivot. Pivoting is all big buzzword in management at the moment. And most businesses fail at this stage because this Rube Goldberg contraption falls apart. But the ones that get going, that take off, start to get rational, retrospective rationalization of what works. Doesn't emerge rationally, but it's emergent strategy and is rationalized in retrospect. This is the area of strategic management. I've heard of Michael Porter and his value chain. It's a wonderful linear sequence, everything flowing together, and you're doing wonderfully well, you're growing in scale, you've got a formula for success. Who would not want to preserve this formula? And that's exactly what they do. Goes into a conservation phase. Put in an organization, bosses in charge of boxes, all divided up. Obviously, there's going to be some responsibilities that fall between the two, so you drop another boss on top of them. And of course, it goes all the way up until you get the big boss who oppresses, depresses, compresses the hierarchy underneath him. This is an organization designed not to change, or at least to be homeostatic within narrow boundaries. And going up here is akin to plotting a course. You have the destination because that came from your passion, and now it's all about reason. And what happens over time is that the logic of utility takes over the logic of identity. And in fact, the means become ends in themselves. Now, all we're doing is maximizing shareholder value. That is our purpose, and that's it. There's nothing higher than that. And as managers get promoted, they climb a ladder of abstraction, because the only way you can scale the firm is by abstracting from the fine-grained stuff and chunking and parsing to make it easier. And as you go, you're simplifying your addressed environment, not the environment, it's that mystery out there, but you're simplifying, you're selecting and chunking bits of it so you can handle it, because you've got this wonderful recipe for success. And so they go facts, data, categories, concepts, theories. They go from context grounded, context dependent, to abstract, context-free ways of thinking. And of course, they build at now head office, because we've got a hugely successful organization. We want to show the world how successful we've been, and so we're now in a power regime. In the old days, when we were entrepreneurs, if you wanted a resource, you had to find a customer. They were the only one, and someone outside the organization who had a resource. Now, when you want a resource, you have to go to the palace, because those are the guys with budget. And you go to the palace, and you know what? It's full of courtiers and other hangers-on who sell access and influence, and it's an old story. And I feel that this leads to what I call the embalmed look at the top. These are the CEOs from 1993. You can see they've got a little too much rouge and these kind of surreal smiles. They're like a waxworks. And I feel this is what happens to you when you get cut off from feedback. I mean, these guys get a new car every 3 months, looked after by their own mechanic in a heated garage. Do their cars squeak? I don't think so. Do they have to fight with the dealer as to whether this is covered by warranty? Of course not. So they are insulated from the real world through this process of abstraction, because they're so high up, they're just protected. They live in a cocoon, which leads, of course, to a big fire in the palace. Crisis, things fall apart, center cannot hold, kicks us into the back loop. And here we go on the back loop. The images from the back loop are from the Hebrew Bible. Religion, if it's nothing else, is a story of change. Wilderness, mountain, promised land. Confusion, and if you've got to get out of confusion, you need creative leadership to take you up the mountain for a vision of promised land, community, resources for young people, milk, honey, options. And because if you don't have good options, you can't make good choices. And choice is the opposite of crisis. And the leaders have to come down to earth. Only I might add in religions based on Greek philosophy, but that's another matter. They have to go from abstraction to action. And I'm not a Catholic, but as a student of leadership, I'm an enormous admirer of what Pope Francis has been doing and what he's trying to do. And here he comes. He won't live in the Vatican Palace. He's going to live in the apartments. He won't ride in the big stretch Mercedes. He wants his little Fiat. He won't wear the ermine and mink and jewels. He's just going to go with the plain stuff, because he wants to be on the ground, close to the phenomena. There's a lovely story about the guy. Go down here. Sorry. Little less volume. The guy who's he's the Vatican arms collector. He doles out arms to the poor, and he gets a call from Francis one night, and Francis, Your Eminence, oh wow. He said, I want you to sell your desk. He said, well, I don't understand. He said, the people who come through your door looking for money are not the ones who need it. You need to get out on the streets and run the Vatican poor donation arms for the poor program out there. Don't wait for them to come to you, because if they come to you, if they can find you, they've already of gaming the system. So get out there. Fascinating story. And he says, what's our mission? To serve the poor. He's trying to bring them back to re-engage passions, to get them back to the purpose. And he's not going to have a fight about divorce and whether divorced people can have communion, because you've got to focus on the mission, and you take everything you need for the mission and everything else you just leave behind. You don't get the fights about it. You just say, do we need it for the mission? Is it going to take us where we want to go? He is, in the jargon, raising awareness, easing constraints, distributing cognition, discerning the present, restoring narrative, managing for serendipity. He's a catalyst to innovation. He is making meaning, and that's what I believe leadership is all about, making meaning. And he'll tell a story, once upon a time. That's the vehicle. It does not have to be a big gesture. Now, I hope you can see this. This is the first Obama administration. He is in the UK, meeting with Gordon Brown. Sorry, I need to get a bit more precise control just to make sure I can get it playing. And they're going to walk across the street to Downing Street. And I want you to watch the interaction with the black policeman who is at the gates as they walk across. So here we go. Discussing multilateral trade or God knows what else, some really complex big deal. Heads of state, very prestigious occasion, and here we go. In the moment, Obama reaches out, shakes the black policeman's hand. He's just created a space for conversation. Now, nothing is said, but in that moment he's changed the scale. You know, I'm here for multilateral trade, but there's a black policeman. Hi there, how you doing? And of course, poor old Gord Brown, stiff Brit, you know, doesn't even recognize that. And of course, our limbic systems, I understand from, I'm not a cognitive scientist, climb all over this, because one of the questions we're continually asking is this safe or is this dangerous? And we'll pick up clues from anywhere, and in a moment, we think we have learned reams about Obama, and indeed you have, I think. And also a bit about Gordon Brown. So, doesn't have to be a big gesture. It's all about a compass, a sense of direction, where your values are driving it, not utility, not what am I here for to discuss high trade deals, do I need to shake hands with this policeman? No. It's not that, it's not a calculation, it's meeting another black person. I don't know what went through Obama's head, but maybe he would have shaken his hand if it was a white policeman, but that doesn't matter. It's a person, and he's doing a job, and you're saying in the moment, and can you imagine that? I mean, I can show the policeman didn't wash his hand for a week because he came back and said, I shook hands with Obama. Amazing. That's what leadership is all about. It's not quite as simple as this, unfortunately, because there are traps at either end of this life cycle. So it's not a smooth ride. On the right-hand side here, we have the success trap, competency trap, power trap, if you like. On the left side, it's the failure trap, poverty trap. Here, from a little bit my limited knowledge of systems, the poverty trap, the short-term feedback is negative. So it's very hard to get going without intrinsic motivation, which is very important, NB. You have to be intrinsically motivated to get out of a poverty trap, because short-term it's all negative. Over here we have rigidity trap, where the short term is all positive. You know, earnings went up, I got my bonus, earnings went up, I got my bonus. The fact that we are looting the firm, or at least liquidating the firm, doesn't feature. Because the long run is negative, but we're all focused on the extrinsic motivation. Okay, so here we go. Traps either side. Success trap, failure trap. This notion suggests that there may be something we could call the sweet zone in between these two. Now we're all going to go through the failure trap, but once you're out of the failure trap and you're in the sweet zone, you don't want to go so far that you fall into this, because these are very difficult to get out of. Very, very difficult to get out of. And so there's this notion of a zone, a sweet zone, where we're just in the right spot. I think this ties in with the Japanese notion of ba as a space, particularly gemba, which is the place where value is created. And so into the sweet zone, the temptation is to drop a steering wheel and say, okay, well, thank you for that. We'll now say straight ahead, straight up is sustainable future. Good, we get that. And we're going to go to the left and exploit the possible. This is management jargon. And then we're going to go to the right and explore the probable, and then we go back to the left, and oh boy, I think I get the hang of this already, it's really nifty, this is wonderful, I can drive this thing. Unfortunately, this is far too Cartesian. It implies a degree of agency and control which does not exist over complex human systems. The situation, so we'll get rid of Descartes, and say the real situation is that of a rider on an elephant. This is Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. Anyone read The Righteous Mind? Jonathan Haidt's happy metaphor. And of course in business, the rider is strategy and the elephant is culture. And as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You're not driving a car, which is not real easy. You are riding an elephant. And how do you change the direction an elephant wants to take? And it's a nice choice because elephants are social animals, so you know, where are the other elephants going, and how do you move a herd of elephants? This pulls you back into the system as an immersed participant. And I like to think this is the Cartesian steering wheel is detached, and the rider on the elephant, all of a sudden you're part of the system. You're right immersed in the system. You don't have any ability to steer it. And this is where I was interested to hear Stephen mention Nicholas Luhmann this morning, because Luhmann is very skeptical of our ability to steer complex systems. And for a manager, explore the possible, exploit the probable. Always the two roads in the wood. Leadership and management. The logics of identity, who are we, why do we matter, what's our mission, and the logics of utility. What do we want, how do we get there, what are the next steps? Both and, not either or. And it's a continual weave, if you like, a conversation between the two. A conversation between utility and identity. Yes, we can do this, yes, this is expedient, but what does it do to our identity? What does it do to our story? Are we the kinds of people who would do this in a situation like this? Just as I talked about the hunters last night. Success trap, failure trap. And you can zoom in here, and now we're at the nexus of the two. We've got our elephant, doesn't know which way to go. How are we going to move the elephant? Well, we're going to put in this is the nexus, where the eco-cycle crosses over. The basic notion is that organizations typically start with a high sense of purpose, but a very low agreement on how to get there. Low agreement on means, high agreement on ends, low agreement on means. And then over time, as they age, they get higher and higher agreement on means, and they start to forget about why we did this in the beginning. I mean, the founder's purpose may have long since been achieved, and the purpose has not been renewed. So you have this logics of identity, who and why, over here on the left, and the logics of utility, means, what and how, over here. And over time, the what and how tends to take over from the who and why. And at this stage, we can start to drop in two by twos, which is no management academic can speak without showing you a 2x2. And this is one from Clay Christensen and colleagues. And basically, it's agreement on what we want, purpose, ends, is high-low. Agreement on how the world works, high-low. And we can drop it into our eco-cycle, but of course what it does is it takes the static framework and it just snaps in there, and now all of a sudden it becomes dynamic. Now it's in a dynamic process. And so you've got power at the bottom, leadership, management, culture, and culture is the stories and the rituals. I call it the heavy keel. I rather like the shape of a keel. That heavy keel on a boat is very useful because it keeps you going in the direction you want to go. But if you want to change direction, a heavy keel fights you. You'd be much better without a keel. So, but that would blow you all over the place. On the bottom, power, when you've got low agreement on purposes and low agreement on means, low agreement on ends, low agreement on means, then it's power. I mean, when you think about why do we have Middle East dictators, we have them because their countries are essentially, ersatz countries created by colonials, and there's no agreement on purpose and there's no agreement on means. Therefore, only a strong man can impose order on it, so it's power. On the left here, leadership builds agreement on purpose, the people relationships. It deals with innovation and change. Over here, management is all about task and means, creating the thermostat. It's about power over, and here to the left is power with, and we can go into that later if need be. For those of you who know, how many people know Dave Snowden's work in the Cynefin framework? Oh, we've got a few. You do the same with Snowden's work. This is his framework. It's not a 2x2. Basically, you've got simple, complicated, complex, chaotic, and the verb in bold is the primary verb in that area. So when it's simple, you just categorize and respond. This falls into this, I have a standard procedure, bang, there it is. When it's complicated, analysis is important. You know, what procedure is required here, what data do we have? When it's complex, you probe and wait for a response. When it's chaotic, you have to act. And it's a sense-making framework that recognizes causal differences amongst different systems. And we can immediately color them up with our color scheme and drop them into our framework. And so here we have simple power, all about categorization and taking action, responding. Complicated management, all about analysis. Chaotic leadership is continual acting, and the complex culture. Okay, I've gone through this as if this was an easy thing for organizations to do. Cautionary findings from Santa Fe. This is Jeffrey West. Anyone know Jeffrey West research? Just came up with a new book called Scale. Basically says both corporations, firms, and cities shows economies of scale as they grow, so they become more profitable as they grow. Yet all firms die while cities can live indefinitely. And why is that? Is that cities, when they grow, their social interactions scale superlinearly. So if a city doubles in size, it gets 2.15 the number of interactions, which means more innovation, more variety, more communicable disease, more crime. But that variety is able to allow them to live to survive indefinitely. In firms, social interactions scale sublinearly. And so as firms grow, they economize on conversation. And it seems to be an iron law. There is no escape from it. And so they all die, just like us. And West says that a city, an organization's systemic properties are somewhere between a biological organism and a city. But the economies of the scale destroy the dynamics of innovation. The unit of survival is, of course, the level above, the ecosystem, which takes us back to our unit of survival, the forest, our symbol of perpetual change, and nothing lasts unless it is incessantly renewed. Thank you.